My parents bought my sister a brand new BMW while I was still paying off my student loans and begging them for rent money. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That day, I drove home in my old beat-up Honda that coughed every time I pressed the gas. It was a cold afternoon in our small town in Ohio, and I hadn't visited my parents for months. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I froze. There it was, a shiny silver BMW with a giant red bow on top. I didn't even have to ask whose it was. My sister Sierra's name was printed on the temporary license plate. Inside, Mom and Dad were beaming. "Surprise for your sister," Mom said, her voice filled with pride. Dad stood next to her, grinning like he'd just handed over the keys to a new life. "She's worked so hard," he said, as if she'd climbed a mountain instead of switching jobs twice in a year. I smiled weakly and tried to act happy. "Wow, that's nice." My words came out flat. My hands still smelled like coffee and sanitizer from the cafe, where I'd just finished my double shift. I was behind on rent and still trying to make a dent in my student loans. They knew that. I had asked them for help just last month, but Mom said things were tight and maybe I should learn to budget better. Sierra came downstairs, glowing like she was in a commercial. "Do you like it?" she asked, flipping her perfect hair. She hugged me like she was being generous with affection. "You know, you could trade your car in. They've got great deals right now." She meant well, or maybe she didn't. With Sierra, it was hard to tell. She'd always been the golden child, the one who never had to ask twice. At dinner, they talked about her new job, her bonus, her future. My name barely came up. Mom said she was proud of both her daughters, but her eyes never left Sierra. Dad asked Sierra if she'd picked a name for her car yet. When I tried to share that my manager had offered me extra shifts, Mom changed the subject. I kept my face neutral, laughing at the right times, nodding when expected. But inside, something cracked. I'd spent years telling myself it didn't matter, that love wasn't measured in gifts or attention. Yet sitting there, watching my sister soak up their admiration, I felt small. Not jealous, exactly, just invisible. When dinner ended, Sierra offered to drive me home in her new car. I said no. I needed the air, the silence. As I walked to my Honda, I looked back at the bright car gleaming under the porch light. My reflection appeared faintly in its door, tired, plain, forgotten. That night, as I drove away, I promised myself one thing. I would never let them make me feel that invisible. When I was 16, I already knew how things worked in our house. Sierra got what she wanted before she even finished asking, and I got told to be patient. Every afternoon after school, I'd walk to the diner on Main Street to bus tables while Sierra was dropped off at cheer practice in Mom's shiny SUV. I'd come home smelling like grease and lemon cleaner, and she'd be showing off a new pair of sneakers or talking about the girls she met at camp. Mom, Janet Reed, loved how Sierra looked in her cheer uniform. She'd take pictures, fix her hair, and talk about how put together she was. Mom liked anything that made the family look perfect, matching outfits for holidays, spotless kitchen counters, polite smiles at church. She cared more about how people saw us than what was actually going on inside our walls. Dad, Rick Reed, stayed quiet most of the time. He'd sit in his chair, reading the paper, pretending not to notice when I came home late from work. He wasn't mean, just absent. If I ever tried to talk about how unfair things felt, he'd mumble something like, "That's just how life goes," and go back to reading. The summer before college, I begged them for help with tuition. I had been accepted to a state university and worked extra hours just to cover the deposit. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, hands shaking, explaining how much I needed their support. Mom sighed and said, "Callie, you need to learn responsibility. We can't just hand you everything." 2 weeks later, Sierra got a new phone because she'd earned it by keeping her grades up. I remember watching her unwrap it at the dinner table while Dad laughed at one of her jokes. No one even looked at me. I tried not to hate them for it. I told myself they were just stricter with me because I was older, that maybe they expected more from me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something in the way Mom looked at Sierra, like she saw herself reflected in her, that she never had with me. I learned to keep my mouth shut, to smile and act grateful when they compared us. Every comment, every dismissal, every time they said, "Your sister's just different," settled in my chest like small stones. By the time I left for college, I was carrying the weight of them all. Years later, when I thought about those moments, I finally understood what had always bothered me. It wasn't just about money or gifts or the things Sierra got. It was about being seen, about being valued. They didn't favor her because they had more to give. They favored her because she fit the picture they wanted. I didn't, and realizing that hurt more than any bill or rejection ever could. It had been almost 3 years since I last went home. I told myself things might have changed, that maybe time had softened everyone, including me. When I pulled into the driveway, Sierra's BMW was still there, shining like it had never touched a speck of dust. Through the front window, I saw balloons, flowers, and a banner that read "Congratulations, Sierra and Evan." My stomach tightened. Inside, Mom was arranging silver platters on the dining table, her movements sharp and proud. "You made it," she said, her tone clipped but polite, as if I were a guest instead of her daughter. Dad gave me a small nod before returning to the list in his hand. Sierra appeared from the kitchen, glowing in a fitted white dress that probably cost more than my rent. "Evan just proposed in Napa," she said, showing off the diamond. "Isn't it gorgeous?" I smiled out of habit. "It's beautiful. Congratulations." She kissed my cheek, her perfume too sweet, her eyes scanning me up and down. "You still work at that little cafe, right?" she asked. Her voice carried that same sugary tone she'd always used when she wanted to remind me of my place. I nodded, trying to stay calm. Mom cut in quickly. "We're hosting the engagement party here next month. It's going to be huge. Evan's parents are flying in from New York. Maybe you could help with the catering, honey. You're so good at that sort of thing." I blinked. "Help with it? I thought I'd be a guest." Mom laughed softly. "Well, of course you'll be here, but we just thought it'd be nice if you pitched in. You're creative with food." Sierra smirked over her champagne glass. "Yeah, Callie can handle the appetizers while the rest of us mingle. It's kind of her thing." The word stung more than I wanted to admit. I looked around the room, the flowers, the expensive decor, the perfect smile plastered on my mother's face, and felt like I was fading into the background all over again. Later, while everyone toasted to Sierra's bright future, I stood near the doorway, pretending to check my phone. Sierra approached, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You look cute," she said, pausing just long enough to add. "That dress, is it vintage or just thrifted?" She laughed, eyes glittering. "Maybe you'll get lucky next life." Something in me cracked. My throat burned, but I didn't say a word. I just grabbed my bag, told Mom I had to get up early, and walked out. No one followed me. In the car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, the laughter from the house echoing faintly behind me. My eyes blurred, and before I could stop it, I was crying. Not from sadness, but from years of swallowing everything. When the tears stopped, the silence felt heavy but clear. Somewhere deep inside, something cold and steady began to take shape. Whatever warmth I had left for them, it ended that night. The morning after that dinner, I couldn't stop replaying Sierra's voice in my head. Every word she'd said still stung like salt on an open cut. I spent the next few days at work moving on autopilot, my mind drifting back to all the years I'd covered for her, the lies I'd helped her keep. Back then, I thought I was being a good sister. Now, it felt like I'd helped build the pedestal she stood on while she laughed down at me. That's when the idea came, quiet at first, just a flicker. Not revenge exactly, but something close. A correction. I remembered how Sierra used to text me panicked at 2 in the morning, begging me to write her college essays or fix her reports. She could barely spell check a paragraph, but she'd still brag about her perfect GPA. I was the one who made it happen, and now she was building her new life on the same kind of lies. Evan Parker, her fiancé, owned a construction company, successful enough to make headlines in local business magazines. I'd met him once years ago, when Sierra introduced us briefly at a holiday dinner. He seemed kind, humble even, not the type who'd fall for her tricks. So when I overheard Mom bragging that Sierra had a degree in project management and worked side by side with Evan, something didn't sit right. I called an old co-worker from the cafe, who now catered corporate events. She'd served at one of Evan's company parties and mentioned that Sierra never stayed long, always ducking out early. That's when it clicked. Sierra had lied to him, just like she lied to everyone else. For a while, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it wasn't my problem. I didn't want to be the person who tore down her sister's world, no matter how cruel she'd been. I even tried to talk myself out of caring, whispering that karma would take care of it. But the guilt twisted in circles. Guilt for wanting to expose her, guilt for staying silent. Then, one weekend, Mom hosted a small gathering for family friends. I went out of courtesy, thinking maybe I could finally let things go. Sierra walked in late, wearing a white dress again, the same smug smile on her face. When someone mentioned my name, she laughed and said loudly, "Oh, Callie? Our family charity project. She's the reason Mom keeps old leftovers." The room erupted in laughter. My cheeks burned, and I felt every eye glance toward me, waiting for me to laugh along. I didn't. Something inside me went still, not angry, not broken, just calm in a way that scared me. That night, I opened my laptop and found the old folder where I'd saved all her papers, proof of every lie she'd told. I stared at the screen for a long time, then whispered to myself, no more. Sierra's mask was coming off, and this time, I'd be the one holding the truth. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose. It wasn't anger driving me anymore, it was something colder, sharper. I started small, just looking through the old flash drives buried in my desk drawer. Most of them were from college, half filled with essays and resumes I'd written back when Sierra was too busy to do her own work. Each file I opened brought memories I didn't want to face. I found her freshman year reports, ones I'd typed myself while she was out partying. The titles still had my formatting, my phrasing. Even the cover sheets bore her name, the neat version of my handwriting she'd practiced copying. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. She hadn't just stretched the truth. She'd built her entire story out of lies. I found templates I'd made for her fake internship letters, all signed with names of people who didn't exist. My stomach turned as I read through them. Back then, I thought I was just helping her get by. Now, it felt like I'd written the script for her entire life. At night, after closing shifts at the cafe, I'd sit at my kitchen table scrolling through old emails. Some were from university accounts, others from shared drives I shouldn't still have access to. I knew I was crossing a line. If anyone found out, I could lose my job. But I couldn't stop. I needed to see just how deep her deception went. One message caught my eye. It was from a professor thanking Sierra for submitting a project on construction management. Only the attached document was one I'd written for my own coursework. That's when I realized Sierra had claimed my assignments as her own after I graduated. She had used my work to pad her resume, to impress Evan, to convince everyone she was something she wasn't. I printed copies of everything and spread them across my table. The evidence was undeniable. Forged transcripts, copied essays, even a fake diploma template saved under my name. It was all there, like a crime scene I'd unknowingly helped create. But when I looked at the pile, my chest tightened. I could end her engagement with one phone call. I could ruin the image she'd spent her life polishing. Yet a small voice whispered, "What will that make you?" I sat there for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. My fingers hovered over my phone, tempted to call Evan, tempted to end the whole charade. But my heart thudded too loudly for me to move. Finally, I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and tucked them into a folder. My reflection in the window looked back at me, tired, wary, but certain. I whispered into the still air, my voice low but steady. "I'm not doing this out of hate. I'm doing this because no one ever stood up for me." The night of the engagement party was colder than I expected. The country club's parking lot shimmered under gold string lights, every car a sleek reflection of wealth and comfort. I hadn't been invited, but I didn't care. My hands tightened around the folder resting in the passenger seat. It felt heavier than paper should. Inside, the ballroom looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers glowed above tables covered in white linen and roses. Waiters moved in polished rhythm, carrying champagne flutes and trays of shrimp cocktails. I caught sight of my parents near the bar, smiling proudly beside Sierra and Evan. She looked flawless, hair pinned, makeup perfect, laughter practiced. Her diamond ring caught the light every time she raised her hand. I walked in quietly. The room shifted, people glancing my way. Sierra's smile faltered for a heartbeat before she recovered. "Callie," she said, voice dripping sugar. "You made it. I didn't think you'd want to come after last time." I smiled back, steady. I wasn't sure either, but I had something important to bring. She blinked, unsure how to respond. I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the marble. The crowd around her began to notice. Evan turned, looking pleasantly surprised. "It's good to see you again," he said warmly. "You too," I replied. Then I looked at him directly, my voice even. "Evan, can I ask you something?" Sierra's expression tensed, a tiny warning flashing across her face. "Callie, this really isn't the time." I ignored her. "Do you know where Sierra's degree came from?" The noise in the room faded like someone had turned the volume down. Evan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" I held up the folder. "This. Everything inside shows exactly how she got through school, and how she's been lying to everyone since." Gasps rippled through the guests. Sierra's face went pale. "You're out of your mind," she hissed, stepping forward. "Put that away. We can talk privately." Mom rushed over, whispering urgently, "Callie, please not here. You're embarrassing yourself." Dad muttered something under his breath, but I didn't move. "No," I said quietly. "You've all spent years ignoring what she's done. You looked the other way while she built her life on my work, my effort, my silence." I handed the folder to Evan. "You deserve to know who she really is." He opened it slowly, scanning the pages. His eyes darkened with every line. Sierra tried to grab it from him, but he pulled back. The sound of paper crumpling filled the room. "Evan, she's lying," Sierra cried, her voice cracking. "She's jealous. She's always been jealous." I didn't respond. I just stood there, steady, as the room dissolved into whispers. My parents looked at me like they didn't recognize me. Sierra looked around wildly, searching for someone to save her. No one moved. The silence that followed felt like thunder. In that moment, everything I'd carried, the years of being overlooked, dismissed, erased, crashed down around her instead. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within 2 days, Sierra's engagement was over. Evan returned the ring and left town without a word. The whispers followed soon after. People at the club, Mom's friends, even neighbors who'd once adored Sierra. Everyone knew the truth now. Her spotless image cracked wide open, and no one could piece it back together. Mom called first. Her voice was sharp, trembling with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You humiliated this family," she said, words cutting through the line. "You've always been jealous of your sister. I thought you'd grown out of it, but you're still bitter." I tried to explain, but she didn't listen. "You could have handled it quietly. You didn't have to destroy her life." Dad called later that night. His tone was softer, but no less cold. "Your mother's right," he said. "You went too far. We can't fix this now." He paused. "I think it's best if you give us space for a while." Then he hung up. By morning, the family group chat was gone, my number blocked from Mom's phone. Sierra didn't call at all. I imagined her crying in her old bedroom, surrounded by the remains of her perfect life. Part of me expected to feel satisfaction, but instead there was only silence. At work, I moved through the motions, pretending everything was normal. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. My coworkers noticed the exhaustion on my face, but no one asked. When my paycheck came in, I packed up the few things I owned and left town. My lease was almost up anyway, and the thought of staying there, surrounded by memories of all of them, felt suffocating. The road out of town was long and empty. I didn't have a plan, just a car full of boxes and a vague idea of starting somewhere new. Gas stations, motels, stretches of quiet highway. Each mile made the air feel a little lighter. No more pretending. No more proving my worth to people who'd already decided I had none. Still, the quiet hit hard at night. I'd scroll through my contacts and realize there was no one to call. I had done what I set out to do, but there was no victory waiting for me, only the hollow kind of freedom that comes after everything burns down. One evening, I stopped at a small rest area overlooking a lake. The sky was pale gray, the water still. I watched the reflection of the clouds shift on the surface and tried to make sense of it all. Maybe this was what peace looked like, lonely, fragile, and hard-won. As the wind picked up, I whispered into the empty air, "Maybe peace costs more than forgiveness." The words felt heavy but true. I started the car again and kept driving, not knowing where I'd end up, only that I couldn't turn back. Months passed and winter began to fade. I had settled in a small town 2 hours away, renting a modest apartment above a bakery. The first few weeks were strange, quiet mornings, long evenings, but the stillness started to feel less like emptiness and more like a clean page. With what little savings I had, I began something small. I called it Reed's Table, a catering business I'd always dreamed of, but never believed I could manage. At first, it was just me and a second-hand van I bought from a retired florist. I cooked from a borrowed kitchen, handing out flyers at farmers' markets, offering food samples at community fairs. Most people didn't know my name, but they remembered the taste. Word spread slowly, one satisfied customer at a time. By summer, I had a small list of regular clients, birthday parties, weddings, office events. They trusted me because I never promised more than I could deliver. It felt good to finally build something that was mine. The rhythm of work filled my days. I'd wake before dawn to chop vegetables, plan menus, and test new recipes. It wasn't glamorous, but every meal felt like proof that I could stand on my own. There was no one to compare myself to anymore, no family standard to live up to, just effort and results. Each week, I tucked a little cash aside, watching my business account slowly grow. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. The number flashing on the screen made my stomach tighten. I hadn't spoken to Mom in nearly a year. When I answered, her voice was shaky, warm. "Callie," she said softly, "it's your mother." I didn't speak right away. She sniffled before continuing. "Your sister's not doing well. Evan's gone, she can't find work, and people won't even return her calls. She needs help." For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. I pictured Sierra sitting in that big, spotless house, surrounded by everything she once thought she'd earned. Now, all of it meant nothing. Mom's voice cracked. "You've always been the responsible one. I thought maybe you could reach out? She listens to you." I almost laughed at the irony of it. All those years I'd begged for their help, and they'd told me to learn responsibility. Now the same lesson had circled back, only the student had changed. I took a breath. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said quietly. "I did my part. Now she can learn responsibility." There was silence on the other end, just the sound of her breathing. When she finally spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "You sound just like your father." After the call ended, I sat at my counter, staring at the rows of labeled containers I'd prepared for a client. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt or anger. Just peace, the kind that came from walking away and not looking back. A full year slipped by before I saw my family again. The invitation came from Dad, written in his careful handwriting on a plain card. "Come home for Thanksgiving. Just dinner. No expectations." There was no mention of Mom or Sierra, but something in the simple message made me agree. When I drove up the old street, the house looked the same from the outside. White shutters, trimmed lawn, but it felt different somehow, smaller, almost tired. The porch light flickered weakly, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I stood at the door for a long moment before knocking. Dad opened it himself. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his voice quieter. "You came," he said, almost surprised. I nodded, stepping inside. The familiar warmth of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air, but the laughter that used to echo through those walls was gone. Mom greeted me at the table, her smile forced. "Callie," she said, her tone unsure, like she didn't know how to use my name anymore. I answered politely, keeping my coat on a little too long. Sierra sat at the far end, her hair darker now, her posture stiff. She didn't meet my eyes. Dinner started in uneasy silence. Forks scraped plates, glasses clinked, but no one said much. I noticed the missing decorations, no flowers, no music, none of the usual sparkle. The house that once burst with noise felt almost hollow. Sierra finally spoke, her voice low. "I heard about your business," she said without looking. "Congrats." "Thanks," I replied, keeping my tone gentle. That was all we said. Mom tried to fill the space with small talk, asking about recipes, the weather, anything that didn't touch the past. Dad stayed quiet until halfway through the meal. Then he set his fork down and looked straight at me. "Callie," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "We were wrong. About everything." The room went still. Even Mom stopped moving. Sierra's head dipped lower. I didn't rush to answer. I could feel every heartbeat in my chest. Part of me had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was here, it didn't feel triumphant. It just felt real. "I know," I said softly. No bitterness, no pride, just truth. Dad nodded once, eyes shining with regret. Mom looked away, blinking fast, and Sierra's lip trembled before she hid it behind her glass. The rest of dinner passed quietly. When I stood to leave, no one tried to stop me, but there was something different in their silence. Understanding, maybe even respect. As I stepped outside, the air was cool and still. Walking toward my car, I realized revenge hadn't fixed anything. It never could have. What healed me was finally being seen, not for what I'd done, but for who I was. The truth had done what anger never could. It set me free. The sun had just begun to sink when I pulled out of the driveway, my tires crunching over the same gravel I'd walked on 100 times as a kid. This time, though, I wasn't leaving empty-handed. The car beneath me purred softly, a modest sedan I'd bought outright with money I earned. No loans, no gifts, no help. It wasn't flashy, but every mile on the odometer was mine. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller. The porch light flickered the way it always had, stubborn and faint. I could almost see the silhouettes of my parents standing by the doorway, unsure whether to wave or stay still. Sierra hadn't come outside. Part of me expected her to, but she didn't. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe we were finally done pretending we understood each other. The road curved past the edge of town, the familiar trees bending in the wind. I rolled the window down, letting the cold air rush in. It carried the smell of pine and damp earth, the scent of the place I'd fought so hard to leave behind. My hands rested steady on the wheel. For the first time, I felt no anger, no ache, just a quiet kind of certainty, like the weight that had lived in my chest had finally loosened its grip. The highway opened ahead, wide and empty. My reflection flickered in the glass, older, calmer, unafraid. I thought about all the years I'd tried to earn love by being useful, about the nights I'd stayed silent just to keep peace. Every piece of who I was had been shaped by that house, yet I was no longer tied to it. The person driving away wasn't the same girl who once begged for approval at that kitchen table. Sierra's name drifted through my thoughts, faint as a song half remembered. She would always be part of the story, but only as a shadow lingering in the background, a ghost fading into distance. Whatever became of her was no longer mine to fix. As the town disappeared behind me, I whispered the truth that had carried me through it all. "They gave her everything to make her shine," I said softly, the words steady in the hum of the engine. "But I learned to build my own light, and no one can take that from me." The last of the daylight brushed across the horizon, turning the sky gold for a heartbeat before dimming into blue. I didn't look back again. The past had already had enough of me. What waited ahead wasn't perfect or easy, but it was mine, shaped by my own hands, my own strength. I pressed my foot to the gas, and the road stretched open, endless and clean. The house was gone from sight now, and with it, every trace of the girl who once waited for someone else to believe she was enough. Hey besties, thanks for sticking with me till the end of this wild journey. Imagine watching your parents buy your sister a BMW while you're drowning in debt, and then being called the problem for speaking up. Crazy, right? But sometimes the people who break us just end up building our backbone. If you felt that, hit like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more real stories. See you next time.